Hey everyone, Mike Miller with the Herald Times, joined by IU basketball columnist Jeremy Price. We're going to preview Indiana's trip east to the Big Ten tournament this week. For the first time ever, it's being held in Washington, D.C. after years and years of alternating between Indianapolis and Chicago. This follows along with the eastern footprint the Big Ten has established in recent years with the University of Maryland and Rutgers. This year, the tournament will be at the Verizon Center in downtown D.C., followed by a trip up north next year to Madison Square Garden in New York. This year, Indiana draws Iowa in the first round. Indiana is the 10 seed, just avoided closing in at that 11 seed, which by getting the 10 seed means they got the single bye and will open at 6:30 p.m. Thursday. You can catch the game on ESPN2. I guess the good thing for Indiana is you're just kind of coming off a couple weeks ago that trip up to Iowa City in a game that Indiana led for a large chunk, really not necessarily controlled, but they led for a large chunk, but still turnovers were kind of bogging them down at different points. Finally, Iowa caught up, and really when you look at that game, it was an instance where Peter Jok, a first-team All-Big Ten player, scored 35 points, set an Iowa record by going 22 of 23 at the free throw line, and that was really where Indiana was doomed, just that discrepancy at the line.
Yeah, it was certainly one of those vintage hit-and-miss performances that we've seen from Indiana down the stretch of this season. But it was also one of those where they showed flashes of being the good Indiana. The bad side was, like you said, the free throw situation, and that's where really Iowa did a lot of their damage, and primarily Peter Jok. So obviously Indiana can't afford to put itself in that situation again. It can't afford the foul trouble, number one, and it can't afford to give Iowa free points, which is basically what you're doing when you foul Peter Jok in that situation. And obviously what Indiana would like to do would be to get to the free throw line a little bit more itself.
Absolutely. In that game, Robert Johnson, I believe, had 18, 19 points. It was one of the few productive, frankly, games that Robert Johnson had all throughout the month of February. It was a really tough month for the junior guard who just, for whatever reason, wasn't scoring, really just looked, frankly, like a shadow of his former self. He was a guy who was really reliable on both ends of the floor, but especially in the offensive end, he was turning the ball over at an even a higher clip than normal. He wasn't finding the basket with consistency. And going into Ohio State last weekend, he seemed to break his slump, scoring just one shy of his career, tying his career high, 26 points against the Buckeyes. Seems he too is coming out of his slump at the right time for Indiana.
He is, and obviously this is a situation where Indiana needs all hands on deck at this point. Even though Iowa you would look at as a winnable game, Indiana hasn't really clicked on all cylinders for quite some time now. So if you can get Robert Johnson going, you got Juwan Morgan, who seems as healthy as he's been in a long time at this point. Thomas Bryant, if you can keep him going in a positive direction, avoid that foul trouble that we talked about before, then Indiana has a chance to put something together against an Iowa team that's actually playing its best basketball this season, and the catalyst for that was that game against Indiana. Since then, Iowa's really put it together. At that point, Iowa looked like maybe an NIT team. Even that was kind of iffy. Now they're on the NCAA bubble and looking at this game as a must-win, and maybe that's one thing we should factor into this. This is a must-win situation for Iowa. It's really a no-lose situation for Indiana, so we'll see if they can sort of parlay that situation into their advantage.
If they should beat Iowa, they would match up on Friday evening at 6:30, I believe, against Wisconsin. Wisconsin always a difficult matchup for Indiana, although they did come close up in Madison early last month. What would be, I guess, the keys to getting past Iowa and getting to a potential matchup with Wisconsin to play for a trip to Saturday's action?
Well, I think obviously the number one thing is the thing we've talked about all year is the turnovers. Indiana's got to limit those. The game against Ohio State, that was the fewest turnovers in 2 months for Indiana. So that trend has got to continue. You have to avoid the foul trouble if you're Indiana. You need to shoot the ball well from three. Again, that game at Ohio State, the most threes that Indiana's made in 2 months. So a lot of things there that went right. Those same things have to continue to go right. And then hopefully you pick up the defensive pace a little bit against Ohio State. It started off well, then faded. You look at that last game against Iowa where it was 96-90. You look at that Ohio State game, 96-92. I think Indiana would prefer that to a slowdown type of game that's 60-50, but probably somewhere in the middle is more where Indiana wants this.
Michigan State coach Tom Izzo came out yesterday and said that this is basically a wide open field. You could look at any number of teams of the 14 teams in this pool and say anyone could win it. I'd probably put Rutgers on the outside, though. I don't think they have any shot of advancing, at least to the championship. But it appears to be at least a wide open field. We'll see if Indiana can take advantage of that in step one against Iowa Thursday at 6:30. Again, you can catch the game on ESPN2. Follow us on Twitter at JP Price, at Mike Miller, HT. We'll see you afterwards.